Today on episode 94, it's part one of a two-part conversation on financial literacy, both for our students and for us as teachers. It's widely known that many people find themselves in constant financial trouble, and a lot of this stems from a lack of financial education before we're sent into the real world. While college may prepare us for a career, there are far and fewer resources that prepare us for true adulting. In this first conversation, I have a special guest, Rob Phelan, a math and financial literacy teacher, and we discuss the need for students to learn financial literacy as a basic skill and how new teachers in the field can begin to get themselves on the right track when they've made a mess of their money.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, where we help new and beginning teachers navigate through those crazy first years of teaching so you can maintain your sanity and personal life. Here's your host, Kim Lapre.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kim Lapre, and this is the podcast for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. I am so happy that you stopped by today, and I'm definitely grateful that you're here. Now, just a quick reminder, there's still time to sign up for the New Educator Weekend North in Santa Clara, California. It's from February 21st to the 23rd, and I'm sure you've heard me mention it in past episodes. I keep telling you about it because it's a fabulous opportunity. It's only $49 to register, which includes pretty much all of your meals aside from dinner on Saturday, and you get continuing education credits. So head over to teachersneedteachers.com/conference to sign up and even get a discounted hotel rate.
This is Gabriel Carrillo from the EdTech Bites podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you are listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of each individual host. Make sure you check out all the other great podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com. And get ready, because the learning begins in 3, 2, 1.
A lot of college graduates find themselves entering the professional world without a solid financial base. They have this newfound money that they're working their butts off to earn, and they want to live it up and have fun. This is exactly what I did, and luckily, I managed to start saving for retirement and all of that. However, a lot of financial pitfalls that come with this type of lifestyle, such as consumer debt, really caught up with me and so many others. So today, I'm having a conversation with Rob Phelan, who's a high school personal finance and math teacher from Maryland, and we're going to dive into a conversation about the traps that newer and younger teachers tend to get caught up in. We also discuss the steps to get out of that when you're finally ready to get serious about getting your finances on track. So here's my conversation with Rob. Thank you, Rob, so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Kim, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to get to talk to your audience.
And can you let my audience know how you got into teaching and your teaching story?
Absolutely. So teaching for me was something that came up almost kind of by accident. My family had been originally from Ireland. They were living in the US. So I was actually born in New York when my parents were in their 20s. And then they moved back to the US when I was about 10 years old. So I got to experience elementary school in the US. And then I got to experience secondary school in Ireland. And then college kind of came after that. And I probably decided at the very end of my senior year of high school that, this teaching thing doesn't sound too bad, because I really can't decide what else I want to do. And a lot of my extended family are teachers. So it was really a terrible reason to go into teaching, but it actually ended up being the best decision I ever made.
Nice.
And I went for physical education teaching. So that was my original thought. I was like, you know what? I love being outdoors. I love being active. I seem to do really well working with kids. So combine all those things together. What do you get? It's a PE teacher. And so that's what I did. I went to University of Limerick for physical education. And when I got in the door, I realized that they actually require you to take a second subject as well, because they are insightful enough to know that a PE teacher is a hard job to get. And usually having a second subject makes you much more employable.
Mm-hmm. True.
Yes. So I had to choose between, let me see, it was geography, chemistry, English, Irish, the language, or math. And I kind of was going through that list and I was like, I don't like the sound of chemistry, English, no. Irish as a language, no. It was kind of like, well, math wouldn't be too bad. I liked math in high school. Sure, let's do that.
Yeah.
And, on that kind of whim was how I ended up signing up for it. And it's just one of those things where I'm convinced that there's some sort of like fate or there's some hand at play here, because I don't know how I ended up in this course and that particular circumstance, but it ended up being the best thing ever. And I loved being a math teacher. And phys ed was, is great. It's good fun. But I found during my teaching placements that it was such an uncontrolled environment and there just wasn't a huge amount of structure about it. And I actually preferred being in a classroom a lot more than I did being in a gymnasium or outside.
Mm-hmm. And then, so now exactly like what do you teach in terms of like grade and specific area of math, and where do you teach?
Absolutely. So I am a high school personal finance and math teacher in Frederick, Maryland.
Okay.
And transition from PE to math teacher. And then I am in my 6th year of teaching now. And 2 years ago, I was asked to fill a vacancy for, it's called contemporary math. It's a senior class that we offer that is technically a math credit, but it's sort of like personal finance and math come together. And it creates this course that is a high school completer for students who need their 4th math credit.
I can see that in a class like that, it's actually a lot more meaningful for the students because it's not just, doing proofs or something that seems really random to them and meaningless. It's something that actually they can use on a daily basis.
Oh my gosh, yes. Like, it is the class I love teaching the most because there's no standardized assessments. There's no like unit tests that you have to do. No one's really checking to see like, what are the grades these kids are getting. It really is like turn up and teach to what the students want to learn about and, see what direction the conversation goes every day. And it's so much fun to engage with students like this because they really do. They see the value in it. And they may not know it in the beginning. They're kind of like, oh, money, like that's a boring, that's another boring topic at school. But by the end, it really does. You start seeing kids having really good conversations. They ask really good questions. I teach my class to seniors only, and usually in the spring. So it's like right before they're about to go out into the real world. And just at the end, you kind of start seeing them think about, okay, I'm going to have to do this adulting thing really soon. What do I need to know before I leave school? And
right.
it generates great conversations.
Now, I am personally jealous that your school has the class that you're teaching. I would love for my daughter's high school to have that. And I'm intrigued because, like I said before, you're teaching this valuable life skill to teens before you send them off into the real world. And now that you've been doing this for a few years, what were some of the biggest aha moments for your students?
I'm going to come back to that one, but just to kind of say that like your wish about students having that in their school, and that is just huge. Like we need to get financial literacy back into classrooms. Mm-hmm. Home economics used to be a much bigger subject in the US than it is currently. And in that, I think we hear the saying a lot that like your grandparents or their parents were much better with money than we are now. Like just follow what they did and you'll be fine. And it was like the older generations were taught more about how to manage a household in terms of your expenses and then just the other day-to-day things that go into running a household. And then we kind of shifted towards trying to do more academic subjects and placing a lot more emphasis on being good at math, English, science, and so on.
To go to college.
Yeah, to go to college, to be a competitive economy, to win the academic wars that were going on around the world. Like it's just there was a reason for it, and unfortunately, the home economics side got lost. And yet now we're facing several generations who don't really know how to manage their money. And
until they're in debt.
even then,
right.
You look at some of the stats that come out. Standard & Poor did a study in 2015, and I think it was 47% of U.S. adults, can't answer basic questions about financial literacy. 60% wouldn't pass a financial literacy exam. We are ranked 14th in the world for financial literacy for our population, but we're probably the biggest economy in the world. Like lots of things that you're kind of like scratching your head a little bit. And you're like, well, how is that possible? Why are we failing so badly at this?
And even with Google, we could potentially look this up on our own, but at the same time, we don't know what we don't know. So I wouldn't know to look up something like Roth IRA because I've never heard of a Roth IRA. I might have heard my parents talk about IRAs, but who knows what they're talking about? And especially when it's time to buy a house, good God, there's so many terms that you need to know just to, even get the process started. And sometimes you think you're ready to go and there's like, oh, so do you have a lender yet? Do you have any financing yet? Oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah. You need a credit score. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So many things. And that is one of the, like, coming back to your question about, what are the big aha moments, like kids realizing that it's not a big, scary, like world, this whole like managing your money thing. Like it's actually not that hard when you open yourself up to the idea, you have that growth mindset of, I can do this. Like anybody can do this. Like we all have to manage money on a day-to-day basis. It's not this big scary thing. It has rules that it follows and we can learn those things. And the vocabulary is probably the hardest part and the most intimidating part. And by like really starting to introduce kids from a young age. So like I'd work for Choose FI, which is a financial podcast. And we are designing a curriculum that goes from K all the way up through 12. And actually we're working a pre-K component as well. But the idea that there are lessons that you can teach children from any age all the way up to high school, college, that makes this conversation a lot easier and kind of builds those habits and self-belief in handling money by the time they do leave high school, which hopefully does reduce the amount of mistakes we make afterwards.
I have personally fallen into every financial pitfall because when I was in college, when I started college in 96, they were giving credit cards to everybody in college. Regardless of whether or not you had credit, that was the easy time to get credit cards. So
did you get a Frisbee or a t-shirt?
I got a lot of cute little prizes for sure. I got a tote bag, or
I know they give away such great stuff.
Fun sunglasses to make it worth it, or they'd like, oh, we'll give you $50. I'm like, oh, I could use $50. I need that. But what are some mistakes that you've found that many new teachers make when it comes to money?
Thank goodness I did not fall into the credit card trap. For some reason, they don't bother in Ireland to canvass college students for credit cards. But I definitely fell into a lot of the traps that come with increasing your income dramatically in a very short space of time. So I went from a grad school student where I was doing a graduate assistantship. So I was getting my master's paid for, doing night school, and then I was getting a small stipend to coach like a women's soccer team for the college. So I was probably making like 10 grand a year doing this and, really living like a college student. Like, I had an income, it was just enough to live off of. And then I started my teaching job and I probably multiplied my salary by 4 or 5.
Right.
And you're just like, all right, like I've got this money and I'm going to go spend it. And I deserve this because I've been working my butt off in college. I did this teaching placement thing. I'm ready. Like, let's start living like an adult. And the pitfall that a lot of, I would say college students, even teens fall into is you leave home where you've had 2 parents or 1 parent or whoever you've been living with, but they've been living a lifestyle based off of an income of a 30, 40, 50, 60, 7-year-old. Like they've been doing this a lot longer than you have. And, you've gotten used to these things that are around your house. Like you're used to the fast internet. You're used to like all the different cable subscriptions. You're used to the nicer cars. And it's hard for you when you go into your first job to not be like, well, that's what an adult does. Like you have all these things. And you don't really realize that, no, those get accumulated over time. Like you don't start as a 40-year-old with all of the things.
Right.
So, I mean, I bought the new car. Thankfully, like I had some sense built in somewhere. I don't know where it came from, but I bought like a Toyota Corolla as opposed to buying like a BMW. So I'm talking a $15,000 car instead of a 25, 30, 40. Which I see a lot of teachers that are new to the profession coming out with like these new SUVs. And I know what the price tag is. I'm like, oh gosh, you're going to be in trouble with that. You get a nice apartment, or you think, you know what, I'm going to buy a house, and your money just starts kind of evaporating. like into all these nice things. Like you get the gym membership, you start eating out a little bit more. You know what? Your wardrobe needs an upgrade. You're a professional now, so you got to go out and buy all the clothes. And then we talked about the subscriptions. Like you got to have Amazon Prime. And now let's throw in Spotify. And maybe you still like doing PlayStation or Xbox. Throw that in there too. And they just start accumulating. And you don't mind it because you have the money. You can afford it. And so very quickly, end of the month comes, paycheck zero, and you're like, okay, cool. The next paycheck's coming in very soon, and you do it all again.
And it feels good when you get that paycheck in the next month. Like there's almost no guilt involved because even if you meet zero at the end of the month, you're like, yeah, but I know I'm going to get X amount in like one more day.
Yeah, and you got no responsibilities. It's great. But what happens when we hit zero and that's not really zero? We're like, well, you know what? I got credit. And I can borrow from next month because I'm going to get paid, and then I can just pay off that credit card balance, and we're good. And we just do that over and over again, and you start realizing, you know what, I'm spending next month's paycheck already, or actually 2 months down the road paycheck. And that's when people really start to dig themselves into a hole, and they don't usually realize they're in a hole until you're spending 6 months down the road's paycheck, or you can't afford to do anything anymore. The credit cards are maxed out. There's nothing left in the account. Somebody's looking for money and you suddenly don't have the ability to pay it. And that can happen in your 20s. It can happen in your 30s. Like it's different for every person. Some people don't have that epiphany because they kind of just keep getting to thread water for decades. And they make it to their 40s, 50s, and they realize, oh, you know what? There's nothing really, I have nothing to show for it. I haven't saved anything. I haven't accumulated any assets. I've had a lot of fun, but there's nothing really there at the end.
Right. That's such a good point. And, it's tough though. I mean, we're in our 20s usually when we're starting out. And from what I remember, we have these competing priorities, like you mentioned. And I was recently talking to one of my longtime friends, and, we were reminiscing about how we would actually structure our so-called budget so that we basically paid for the bare necessities so that we'd have a bunch of money left to eat out and go clubbing or to the bars and pay for cab fare. And so everything was all about the going out, like working to live. And I feel like it's the same. It's just as hard to ask a 7th grader what they want to major in. When I was a 20 something, I didn't want to think about things like retirement or saving for a home or just saving in general. So how can we still have fun and be money wise though?
It reminds me when I hear this, it reminds me of a conversation I have with a high school student, and, you say to them, well, why didn't you do your homework? And like, well, I don't have time for that. And you're like, okay, well, how are you spending your time? Like, well, I go home, I take like an hour-long nap, I eat, I go to my part-time job for 5 hours, I go hang out with friends. Like there just isn't any time left for homework. And I'm like, okay, but how do we fix that problem? And I think the advice we would probably give these kids, teens, whatever it is to find balance. That you have to think about what your priorities are and then find a way to match those priorities and values with how you're spending your time and also your money. So like if you value going out, if you value going to the bars, clubs, gym memberships, whatever it is, that's great. Like I really wouldn't want you to take those out of your life if they bring you joy. But you got to also think about, okay, what are the other things that have to come into this as well? Like what do I need to do to take care of myself for tomorrow, for next year, for 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? Do I want to buy a house someday? Do I want to get married someday? Do I need to start building a credit score because I want to do these things eventually? I mean, retirement, yeah, it's a pretty foreign concept. Like this idea of, the traditional view of retirement is like, we're going to hit 65, we're suddenly going to stop working and we're going to lay on a beach or we're going to do whatever it is we want to do for the rest of our lives because we've accumulated so much money. And the sad thing is that unfortunately, most Americans are not accumulating enough money to make that dream a reality. We're working later and later. I think the average American is working until they're in their 70s now. And the average American between 55 and 65 only has $120,000 saved for retirement.
Oh, no.
Yeah, which is not going to get you very far.
No.
The average person is spending about 40 to 60 grand a year. So like you're only talking about 6 years covered there.
Oh, wow. And, assuming that Social Security will be around.
Big assumption.
So you're banking on that if you're not really saving for retirement.
Yeah. And I mean, teachers, we often are lucky enough to have a pension as well.
Mm-hmm.
I was curious, like what my pension was worth. If I worked, my entire career until I think I'm allowed to retire at 57, and allowed in quotation marks, I would be getting about 2,300 a month is the projection. And you're like, well, okay, well, that's not even what I'm making at the moment. So it's not going to be enough to continue even the lifestyle I'm doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what Social Security is going to look like by the time I retire. I'm 30 at the moment, so I've got a good bit to go before that's going to become a concern. And I feel like the age that we can get is probably going to keep moving further and further away as well.
Right.
So for me, it's not enough to rely on those. Like, I feel like I got to a point where I was like, I need to take more control of my own financial destiny journey and the things that I want to do in my life. There's a lot of traveling I want to do. There's experiences I want to have. And for me, I don't want to spend the next 30 years of my life tied to a job that maybe I don't want to do in the future. Like, at the moment, I'm happy to do it. But what happens if I get to 50 and I'm like, yeah, I'm really done with this teaching thing. I don't want to be that teacher who's stuck in the job because there's no other choice. You got the golden handcuffs on that you can't leave it because you just can't afford to.
Now, let's say that we don't get it together until our 30s.
Yeah.
And we decide that, okay, we need to pay off those student loans, the credit card debt that we've accrued from having all the fun, and maybe even like a car loan. Now, how can we do all of that and save for an emergency fund and save for retirement on a teacher's salary?
I mean, we're not going to pretend it's easy. It's not like we are one of the professions that is blessed with $100,000 income. And it's just like, oh, well, if you cut your expenses down, you've got a really big shovel that, you can throw money at this thing and it's not going to be too big a deal. Teachers, you're talking about a much more limited income. So yeah, you do have to be a little bit more creative in how you approach this. But I would say you adopt an order of operations. Like, what are the steps that you need to take in order to get yourself in a better financial position? The first thing, where's your money going? Start there. Like, where does it go every month? Like, 'cause a lot of people are like, I just don't know. Like, I get to the end of the month, the balance is zero. I have like a couple of things that I can physically show you that I purchased this month, but for the rest of it, it was consumed in some way. And that's the most dangerous thing, because you don't even notice sometimes it's leaving your account.
Automatic subscriptions.
Oh, they're the worst. Like, you sign up to these things. I mean, Amazon Prime has caught me how many times? Like, I sign up for the free trial and the month passes and I'm like, damn, I forgot to cancel it. And there goes $13 out of my account.
Right.
And yeah, if you don't keep track of your account, like, it may be a couple months before you catch that, or you may not catch it at all. I just noticed that my cable bill came in today and it's $8 more expensive than it was last month. And I have to now call them tomorrow and be like, what's going on here? Why is that? Whereas a lot of people may not even notice. It might just be an automatic debit from your account, which is great. You thank goodness you've made it automatic. You're not missing payments. But if you're not keeping track of it, it can go up and up and you don't even realize it. So yeah, step one, where is your money going every month? And that can be as detailed as you would like. You can, make it a mystery and start digging back through previous months of bank transactions, credit card statements, and so on. Or you can look ahead and say, okay, this month, every time I swipe my card, every time I lay cash on the table, I need to make sure I'm logging this as, I spent X number of dollars in this category on this day. And you create a little history of what you've been doing. And in doing that, you just start to notice patterns. You're like, okay, you know what? I have a gym membership that I don't really go to the gym very often.
Right.
And so if you're going $40 a month for a gym membership and you go once a month, is it really worth $40 every time you step in that gym? Or could you find another way to make that happen? Do you need all of the TV subscriptions? Like, which one are you watching right now? You can cancel Netflix when you end your show, and then when a new show or a new season comes on, you can just pick it back up again. Like, you don't have to hold on to it as a little placeholder. Like, they'll let you come back anytime you want.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, we just picked up Disney Plus because we're like, you know what, that seems like good value for us. And we're kind of excited by some different shows. We have our son who we're trying to we want to share the fun classic Disney stuff that we love growing up with him. And I'd say once we exhaust the content, we're probably gonna be like, okay, we're done with this one for now, unless something new comes out.
Yeah.
So once you've tracked your expenses, now we got to start figuring out, okay, how do we create our plan? And you can call it whatever you want. You can call it a spending plan. You can call it a budget. It is something that you probably need to think about before you really get serious about this. Like when you get better at managing your money, crumple up the budget, throw it out. You're good at managing your money. You have a good idea of how to do this. But in the beginning, I am a firm believer that you do have to put something down on paper or digital paper that is going to be your plan of where your money is supposed to be going, and then seeing, can you stick to that? And
I think that's the hardest part right there. I think, they have a lot of budget planners out there, and some of us even have like a visceral response to the word budget, but they have, spending planners, whatever you want to call them. But it's fun to fill them out, but then sticking to it, that's the hard part.
It is. And like there are different types of budgets out there. It's kind of like the word diet. People assume diet is like a negative thing, like you are restricting something, you're cutting it out. Whereas really a diet is just like, well, what are you choosing to eat? What is your eating plan? Like it doesn't even have to be anything restrictive. It's just like, I could ask you, what's your diet right now? And you could tell me like, these are the things that I eat. Your budget is the same thing. Like, what are you choosing to spend your money on? A big thing to ask yourself is, what do you value the most? So what are the top 10 things that bring you the most happiness on a daily basis, monthly basis, weekly basis, whatever it is, and keep those, that you've earned that. You work really hard. Like it shouldn't be about deprivation. But if there's things that, you have that don't really light you up that much, like you have it because it was the thing to do, you thought you wanted it at some point, get rid of it. You don't need it. And then create that gap where you can start now saying, all right, I'm going to put $1,000 aside. And it's just a nice round number. It can be bigger. It could be, I wouldn't make it smaller, but bigger definitely is fine. $1,000 emergency fund. Put something there so that when a fire happens, like your car breaks down, something in your house breaks, whatever it is, you have money to dip into and you don't have to go back to credit again.
Right.
And so at that point, you're trying to make the decision to stop using credit cards and just stop using debt. Like, don't be the person who's like, I can manage a credit card. I want the points. Like, I'm earning extra points back or whatever. At the moment, if you're in debt and you're in trouble with debt, like you just got to stop it for a little while until you get your money under control. So just cut them out. You can cut them up if you want. You can put them in a drawer. You can put them in ice. I don't mind what you do, but you got to get rid of them for a while.
I've fallen into that trap where I was justifying it because I was getting % cash back or mileage points. And there are some blogs out there that say that it's really smart to do that. And there's a little thing at the bottom that says, but if you're not good with your cards, you shouldn't use credit cards. But they kind of glorify the whole idea of, getting free vacations and free things because you've racked up all these points. But if you can't pay back what you spent to get those points, then there's really no value there because they're making money off of you.
Yeah. And it goes back to, what we're teaching kids in school as well. Like if I were to talk to a parent, I would recommend to them, look, you should probably consider getting a secured credit card for your high school student and make them pay for it. So $200 limit, they have to front the $200 cash, and then they basically get to borrow from that and pay it back every month, whether they're doing it for gas or some small expense that they're having. But you're building this idea that credit is something you can use when you need to, but it has to be paid back every month. Like there isn't the option to carry a balance, because as soon as you carry a balance, you are lining the pockets of the credit card companies.
Yeah.
And like, I love my credit card. Like I've gotten to the point where I've learned to manage my credit card so that I put most expenses on my credit card and then immediately pay it off from my debit account. So like the cash is already there. It goes on like my Chase card, and then immediately I go into my Chase app and I pay it. So that for me is like a responsible way to use a credit card. And I wasn't able to start there. I had to start with no credit card to get out of debt. So I had small student loans to pay off. I had a car to pay off, just small things that had to be prioritized, I guess, before I could say, all right, I'm ready to start using credit responsibly again.
So we have figure out where your money is going.
Yep.
Make a plan.
Yep.
And 2B is stop using your credit cards.
Get that $1,000 emergency fund.
Right. The emergency fund.
So yeah, that's priority number one. If you do have debt, you're paying minimum payments on all of that stuff. It's really tempting to say, well, you know what, I'm going to take this extra money that I'm finding because I've done my spending plan, and I'm just going to divide it amongst all my debt. It's very tempting to do that, and it might work for you, but that usually takes a lot of self-discipline. And a lot of people who are self-disciplined didn't get into the debt in the first place. So most times I would say like, okay, let's just get that $1,000 emergency fund, focus on that, smash it out, get it done, and then move on to the next step. And the next step, you have two options. There are two kind of the most recognized ways of paying down debt. One is called the debt snowball. And this is where you just list your debts from smallest to biggest, and you pay off the smallest one first. So all the other debts you pay minimum payment on, so you're not getting any other penalties, but the smallest debt, any extra money you have, so whatever you've been putting into that $1,000 emergency fund, you've hit 1,000, now put that payment towards your smallest debt. Get rid of it. Soon as that's done, roll that payment plus whatever you're putting to the emergency fund into the next debt. And basically your snowball gets bigger. What you can throw at your debt gets bigger and bigger and bigger each time. And that one really resonated for me. Like I had a chart on my fridge. It was like one of those like fundraising charts. So like every time I put a payment down, like I shaded it in a little bit. And then every time I paid one off and I was able to move it to the next one, it was just a really kind of gratifying feeling. And you start seeing the bigger debt come down a lot faster because you're throwing a lot more money at it. Mm-hmm. The other option is called the debt avalanche. And this one is probably the mathematically correct one to do. This is where you list the highest interest debts first and pay those down first. So that would typically be your credit cards would come first, regardless of what the balances are, because they're the ones costing you the most amount of money. Mm-hmm. So it really comes down to the person. I don't recommend one over the other. I just say, look at yourself. What kind of person are you? For me, I like the small wins that came with the debt snowball, where you got to pay off a small one. It was done. It was gone. And then you got to make a bigger payment on the next one. And there just was a very kind of a good positive psychological feeling that came with that. Whereas when you do the debt avalanche, you may start on a bigger debt and it may take you a couple months to pay it off. And if it does, you can sometimes lose steam. And if you do lose steam, you run into the risk of like kind of going backwards again.
Yeah, it doesn't feel as good to go from like 9 to 7 necessarily, because you still have 7.
Oh, it's like watching my mortgage. It's like a $200,000 mortgage goes down like $300 owed every month. And it's just depressingly slow.
It is. Yeah.
But it's a debt that for me is a much lower interest rate than all the other things that we had. So it was lower than student loans. It was lower than the car. And so that one was at the very back, even though it was the largest amount. Like that one's at the very back. And to be honest, we don't pay down our mortgage extra because the interest rate is at 4.6%, whereas the stock market this year returned close to 30%. So there was a huge gain to be made by investing your money instead of paying down debt.
And also you get the tax write-off from the interest.
Yes.
Always a good thing.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't go unnoticed. It wouldn't be the main motivating factor, but certainly, yeah, we'll take it on. All right. So once you've gotten rid of your consumer debt, so your credit cards are gone, the car payment is gone, your student loans have been paid off, beef up your emergency fund. $1,000 is great. It's not going to help you if you need to replace your roof. Like it's not enough to cover all emergencies. If you lose your job, it's not going to get you very far. So you ideally want to beef up that emergency fund to about 3 to 6 months of expenses. So if you are spending $3,500 a month, you need to be, putting aside like 10 to 20,000 to have in this account to just pull down on if you ever run into an emergency.
And it can be tough because for some of us, seeing that 10 to 20,000, it looks like $10 to $20,000 I can spend on a vacation, or I can spend on something fun.
Oh, there's my down payment on my house. Yeah. I mean, I fell into that trap too. We blew our nice little nest egg on our down payment because we were like, this is what we're saving for. But then you had no emergency fund left, which thankfully it did not turn into an emergency for us, but it could have very easily.
So I definitely hope you found this first half of the conversation as useful as I did and insightful. So here are my key takeaways from what we talked about. First, financial education is abysmally absent from the majority of schools, whether it's the K-12 or higher ed system. We're completely relying on parents to teach life skills like budgeting to their kids. But, when this doesn't happen, there are consequences later in life that could have been avoided. Second, a lot of newer and younger educators fall into the trap of living paycheck to paycheck without anything to show for it. I definitely fell into this category, so I can relate. And it can become really overwhelming when you get yourself into debt, but your pay isn't really increasing to pay off that debt. Finally, there are definite steps you can take to get yourself out of that mess if you do happen to get into it. But it takes some serious adulting, guys, and honest conversations with yourself so that you can reflect on where your money is going and where you need your money to go. Next week, Rob and I finish this conversation by discussing how to save for retirement. And yes, you should start saving now, even if it's $100 a month. And we also dive into the idea of financial independence, which can result in you retiring from teaching far earlier than expected. If you want to get a hold of Rob and ask him any questions about what we discussed today, you can find him at thefieducator@gmail.com, and I'll have that in the show notes for you so you don't have to memorize that. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss that episode or any future episodes of this podcast. Thanks for hanging out with me today, you guys, and have a fabulous week.
Thanks for listening to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. Love this episode? Head over to Apple Podcast or Google Play to subscribe, rate, and leave a review.